Welcome everyone to Scheller Lunchtime Live, a live stream series hosted by the Georgia Tech Scheller College of Business. My name is Lindsay Kane, and I'm the Associate Director of Client Relationships for non-degree executive education programs. On select Fridays at 12 p.m. Eastern, you'll have the chance to hear from Scheller faculty, student, and alumni speakers as they discuss relevant topics for the tech-driven digital age. At Scheller, we're proud to offer undergraduate, MBA, and PhD programs, along with open enrollment and custom executive education programs. It's my pleasure to introduce Karthik Ramachandran, Associate Professor of Operations Management at Scheller, where he teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in new product development, collaborative innovation, and global product strategies. He obtained his PhD in Operations Management and MS in Operations Research from the University of Texas at Austin. Prior to joining Georgia Tech, he taught at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. Karthik's areas of interest include new product development, operations strategy, and behavioral operations. His research has appeared in journals such as Management Science, Manufacturing and Service Operations Management, Production and Operations Management, and IIE Transactions. Today, Karthik will discuss ways an organization can achieve a positive impact for its customers in the face of financial or other constraints by providing unfinished products and services that recipients can complete according to their own taste and abilities. In essence, moving from an off-the-shelf mode of delivery to a partial DIY paradigm that can work for almost any organization. As always, feel free to ask questions in the comments section. Karthik will address as many questions as possible at the end of his presentation. Over to you, Karthik.
Hey, thank you, Lindsay, for the kind introduction and the opportunity to share some of my research with everyone who's joined today. Thank you, everyone, for taking your time and joining us. Hopefully, you'll enjoy this, whether you're at your desk or having lunch or on a treadmill somewhere. Anyhow, let me jump in. The topic of my talk today is how to apply a do-it-yourself paradigm in any organization, hopefully your organization. And at some point, I'll be talking about how firms and organizations can use unfinished products as a way to embrace the DIY paradigm. And maybe I should start with some famous examples of unfinished products. And I will choose them all from art so that you can have some fun Googling them and reading about them later. So this is by far the most famous unfinished drawing of FDR. And it is from April 1945 when he was still sitting president in his third term by Elizabeth Shumatov. The unfortunate background of this unfinished painting is that right about this point when the painting had reached this time, FDR keeled over, had a stroke, and passed away later that day. Kind of a sad start to my presentation, but it'll get more fun, I assure you. Another famous painting that was famously unfinished also is this painting of George Washington from 1796 by the painter Gilbert Stuart, who stopped the painting after he got to this point because turns out George Washington was not much fun to paint. He was not a good or well-behaved subject. But this painting is super famous because an adaptation of this painting is what we see, what we all see in the $1 bill of the United States, right? And if you want to see an ongoing, unfinished project that's world famous and it has an opportunity for you to go experience it, travel to Barcelona, where you can see the Sagrada Familia, which was started in 1882 by Antoni Gaudi, the famous architect, and it's still an ongoing project. So these are all stories of unfinished products where the project remains unfinished because it got out of hand, or the creator lost interest, or the subject was untenable. So these are all situations where the project is unfinished because of situations outside the control of who's creating. But the real focus of my research and what I want to share with you is, can keeping something unfinished be a strategic move? Can you create value by intentionally leaving something unfinished? So let me take you through a quick tour with an example. But before that, I should tell you that most of my research is in terms of understanding how do organizations create value. and especially when they have constraints. And sometimes the constraints are technological, sometimes human resources, sometimes financial. And how organizations create value under these constraints is really what my primary focus is. So, what kind of constraints are we talking about? During the pandemic, among all the other bad things that are happening, one of the primary ways in which a lot of us have experienced the pandemic is how often we seem to be running out of stuff, right? So, off the bat, we ran out of toilet paper. And then, if you are an educator like me, you realize that there were essential pieces of home office equipment that we seem to be running out of, like the document camera here that we like to use for teaching. And Amazon started running out of that. And then we noticed that all the office space around us were needed some upgrading, and we wanted some lumber. Home Depot and Lowe's were running out of lumber. And these were things that we've learned to know that we'll run out of if we are not careful about the supply chains. But we also ran out of some more crucial things, like ready to use therapeutic foods. That is really important and life sustaining in many situations. We ran out of ICU beds, and then we ran out of ventilators. And then we noticed that we are even about to run out of personal protective equipment for our first line caregivers and so on. So we constantly seem to be running out of stuff, which is actually a pretty important supply chain topic where all of the supply chain is thinking about how do you match supply and demand, right? On the one hand, you don't want to have too much supply, and on the other hand, you don't want to have too much demand relative to supply. And when you're running out of stuff, it is a situation where demand is way more than what the supply chain can provide. So there are three, roughly speaking, three known strategies to make this demand match the supply, which is constrained, right? On the one hand, you can become choosy and selective and say, look, we have some things and this is not for everybody. We are going to pick and choose who we serve, right? If that doesn't work for you, you could do what a lot of people in the developing world know as rationing, right? Public distribution systems all over the world use it. They basically reduce how much you can provide to some people. Even in the US, I would say during the pandemic, there were grocery stores that basically stopped people from stockpiling by saying you can take at most 2 packs of toilet paper home, or you can take at most 2 gallons of milk home, or 4 boxes of pasta home. That's a way of rationing where you put a cap on how much people can stockpile during these capacity crunches, right? The third approach, which is to manage the surge in demand, is by doing something called surge pricing, which all of us have become familiar with through the work of Uber and Lyft, where they allow the prices of the commodity or whatever is in demand go up until the supply catches up with the demand, either by the demand coming down or by the supply going up. Right? These are all known strategies. And one of the new things that we have started exploring as a product design based strategy to match supply and demand is maybe you can provide an unfinished product or service to match the supply and demand mismatch. Okay. And one of the arguments I'm going to make is that when you leave the product unfinished intentionally, it is not just an idea to match supply and demand, it might even allow you to create more value than when you finish out entirely complete products. Okay. So, what exactly do I mean by an unfinished product? Okay. Maybe the best illustration of this comes from one of the examples that motivated our entire work in this area. So, let me start out with this evocative setup. So, this is Constitución, Chile in 2010. And a few months after a big earthquake affected Hawaii, there was a follow up earthquake. I think it was 8.8 on the Richter scale. Massive damage to a lot of coastal communities in Chile. The earthquake was followed by a tremendous tsunami, 6 to 8 meter waves, tidal waves, wreaking havoc. And the entire city, the coastal community of Constitucion, was reduced effectively to a rubble. hundreds of thousands of people who are productive citizens on one day become effectively homeless the next day because they actually don't have homes to go back to. Banks are closed, grocery stores are not operational, public utilities are not being provided. So the city was basically at that point dead. So there is this challenge of how do you quickly rehabilitate all of these people and give them an opportunity to get going. Okay. Now, what kind of strategies might you be able to pursue in this, right? So if you think about how to match the demand for housing, which is super high, with the supply of housing, which are severely constrained because the city itself has come to a full stop. Again, you go back and think about what are the standard ways to think about it. You can be selective and choosy, like you were with the toilet paper, and say, hey, this is not for everybody. We are going to try and keep it for some families only. Or you could do some rationing and say, look, we cannot give you the kind of homes that you have. We are going to give you smaller homes, maybe build a tall project type of housing that we see in inner city Chicago or Baltimore or something like that, and say we'll just provide small apartments for everybody. That's rationing in space, right, and facilities. The third thing, if you take advice from what companies like Uber and Lyft are doing, is that, hey, let's auction the whole thing off, right? That way, the housing opportunities go to the highest bidders. Okay. All of these things are theoretically feasible, but from a humanitarian and logical point of view, they are also bad options. Okay. And it is in this situation that Elemental, a famous architectural firm, a now famous architectural firm based out of Chile, was brought into the situation, and they thought of a fourth kind of plan to address the situation where they said, you know what, forget about these standard ways. Let's think about, now that all these homes have been razed by the tsunami and the earthquake, let's think about a totally new way of providing value. How about instead of trying to provide a good house or even a bad house for half the people, we give as many people as we can half a good house? What does it mean to even provide half a good house? It's basically, by definition, unfinished. It's not a whole house. How can that create value? Who wants to move into half a house? So they did some research, did a lot of thinking, and participatory design exercises and things like that, and eventually came up with this design for half a good house, right? I'll let this picture sit for a minute as I talk about this. One of the immediate things that you see is that this is half a house. This is not the whole house that people had or want to have for themselves, right? But in this half a house, they did manage to put in a basic functional kitchen, a basic bathroom, and a connection for electricity and things like that, so people can move in, right? And the advantage of doing something like this was that they were able to save material, labor, and finishing costs on the half of the house they did not build, right? And they were able to provide this for almost everybody in that community, right? So when they handed this off to the community, right, they had this huge community of half houses that were all good, but all of them had this gaping hole in the remaining half of that house, right? And this is what I mean by the strategy of finishing and providing an unfinished product. Okay, one of the key things that you want to take away from this example is that what you can see from this picture from these pictures here is that not only did they provide half a house, they also provided the means for these homeowners or the dwellers of this house the open space needed to build out the rest of the house when and however they can do it after they move it. So this house is half an unfinished product with the opportunity to finish out later. Now, what is the point of this? Right? You provide this unfinished house and you basically invite people to do it themselves. You try to embrace this DIY thing. What is the point exactly of doing something like this? So this is not the first time you guys are hearing about do it yourself. In fact, it's in the news with Apple coming out and saying just the last couple of days that they're going to let you fix your own Apple devices if you ever need a new battery or a new screen or something. That's good news for all of you Apple fans. So this is not the first time you're hearing about do it yourself. So what are some common reasons why this can be valuable? Right? So the first advantage that you get from embracing something like the do-it-yourself methodology is something we see in IKEA or Casper's mattress in a box type of approach, where there is a huge logistical advantage in moving a compressed flat pack that later expands into a futon or a bunk bed, which you can carry around in the back of your sedan or a pickup truck or a minivan, right? As opposed to building out the entire, bunk bed and needing some kind of special conveyance for it to get from the store to your house, right? So there is the basic logistical advantage. There is also an emotional advantage that when people put things together, even if it is obvious, even if the steps are obvious, they tend to love it a little bit more after they put it together. This was the logic behind companies like Build a Bear. I haven't been into a Build a Bear store in a long time, but I think you guys know what I'm talking about. Feel free to Google it if I'm dating myself, right? The third idea of do it yourself methodologies is to preserve value. Sometimes you are shipping out perishable items that if you put it together, if you once you make a box of soup, right, and you sell it to this person in a restaurant, it has maybe a window of 1 to 2 days, even with the refrigeration, before after which it's going to lose its freshness and its value, and it has to be thrown away. But the idea behind shipping the ingredients to you with instructions on how to do it yourself when you're ready for the soup is that Blue Apron basically tells you you can keep the ingredients in your fridge for a week and then open it up and it'll still be good. Okay. Now, what we realized by working with partners like the Terwilliger Center for Shelter Innovation in Atlanta, a unit of the Habitat for Humanity organization, and Daya, another research partner of us in Houston, is that there is another hidden value in embracing the do it yourself approach. It is that sometimes, as an organization, you don't even know what people want when they come and ask for a house or ask for some help or ask for some kind of a product. Even worse, even they may not know what they want at the moment at which they make this decision to ask you for a product. And allowing them to do it themselves is a fantastic way to let them unlock that value after they realize what it is that they want from the product. Okay. And it may sound a little bit abstract, so maybe I'll show this to you with some illustrations. Okay. So, this, by the way, you may recall, I showed this picture to you a couple of slides ago. This was the do it yourself house that Elemental provided for the for the families in Constitución, Chile in 2015 or so, right? So as you can imagine, all these houses are alike. They are put together. You might even accuse them of being cookie cutter half houses, right? This is what each of the families got, and they moved in. And after they moved in, what happened? What happened was this transformation took place, right? So the families move in, and then slowly over time, as they get more materials, labor, tools, help from their friends, and a little bit of savings, and maybe a small loan where they can collateralize half the house that they already have, they start incrementally putting together the rest of their house. And the beautiful thing that I hope you notice in the second picture is that the half that was given to them remains identical. Maybe with the exception of the drapes that they hung, it's the same house. But the other half that these two families built in adjacent homes, they look very different. Even the landscaping in the beginnings of the landscaping look different, right? The family on the left finished out an entire home, basically paralleling whatever was given to them. And the family on the right left the entire upstairs open. Maybe they have a small business, a soap factory, or a fish packing operation or something like that that they have going on, and they need that space as it is. So what these families are able to do after they move in is build out the remaining part of the house, not only when they obtain resources, which varies from family to family, but also in a way that reflects their personal needs and preferences a lot more accurately than any single builder could capture for them. So, one of the big advantages that you get by giving somebody the opportunity to do it themselves is that they don't just do it themselves, they create it themselves, right? So, in a sense, embracing this DIY type of methodology through an unfinished product allowed this organization to embrace the create it yourself paradigm. Okay, so why is it important to think about this create it yourself paradigm, and why do I think every organization can embrace this? It gives you an opportunity to provide a starter piece of equipment, product, or service for everybody. When you give the challenge of building an entire home to somebody like this fishing community in Constitution, Chile, or even somebody who has all the resources in the world, it's a daunting prospect, a lot of friction. People are not ready to get it going, but this gives you a chance to get them going with a starter. And in the end, because clients define their needs through their own actions, through their own design decisions, you get all the benefits of giving a personalized solution without you as an organization having to incur the heavy costs of providing personalized products and services. So, embracing this DIY or CIY paradigm allows you to provide a lot of variety without the costs, without the operational and design costs of having to provide a lot of that variety. So at some point, as I was preparing for the talk, I'm just going to have a little bit of fun with you. I was thinking, well, I have all of this theory, all of this research. Would giving half a house really make a meaningful difference in terms of revealing what is it that people want? So I took this drawing, this illustration of half a house, and recruited some young children to ask them what will they do if they were given the opportunity to design their own homes. Not all of it, but just fill the remaining half of the homes as they see fit. So I ended up with two remarkably different approaches to the solution. So the illustration on the left, the example on the left, was a child who was completely impressed with the first half of the home that was built, right? And decided to effectively replicate everything that he saw in the left half on the right half. And he was interested in the possessions. He was smart enough to not add an extra door to the house. He was not interested in building a duplex, but he added a treasure chest because he imagined the house as a holding place for all these valuables for himself. And the child that you see on the right hand side ignored all of the typical house building things that people might want when they're thinking about space. And when I explored what it was that he has added to the right hand side picture, turns out these are all fairly advanced and not yet available security mechanisms and machinery that will counterattack any invaders to the house. So these are all equipment that has been designed to protect the first half house from being vandalized, right? So again, going back to the point I'm trying to make, just opening up half a house by providing an unfinished product and saying what is it that you want to see in the remaining half of the house has this extremely revelatory value where people come out and design what they want and in the process reveal what are their biggest aspirations or concerns from the unfinished product that you're giving them. So the product design itself can become a mechanism of discovery and value creation. Okay, so that said, I don't want to leave you with the impression that partial design always works, right? For example, I don't think any of you have heard of a half-finished haircut or a half-finished tooth extraction or a half-finished appendectomy or anything of that sort. There are some situations in which this unfinished approach works, and there are also several situations in which the unfinished approach does not work. So we did a bunch of research on this topic. There are the research references available for you. But in a snapshot, the key takeaways from our work is that partial completion as a way to embrace this create it yourself mechanism can be extremely effective when there is a variety of preferences among the clients or customers you are serving, and they have some basic ability to self complete. And if they don't have that ability, maybe you want to have some kind of method or a service component to your organization that enables them and coaches them with the do it yourself skill set. And the partial completion or unfinished approach also works in a spectacular way when some of your customers are more skilled than others. This actually becomes a fantastic way to draft them into the mission of your own organization. We have published this work in some journals and also in the Harvard Business Review. You can Google these and find them for yourself, or write to us if you would like a copy. And I also want to say that there are a lot of other related research going on around the do it yourself idea, in terms of letting people reconfigure their own products, upgrade products they have already obtained as technology evolves, and maybe even not even providing everything they need as a way to serve everybody well. Okay, so I will leave it here with a thank you for spending your valuable noon on Friday with us, and that's it. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you so much, Karthik. I think there's great conversation going on in the comments about how useful it is to provide this DIY option, especially for maybe lower income folks who have the advantage later on to kind of build out and customize as needed these homes. Can we talk a little bit about pricing? Obviously, unfinished products in theory would come in at a lower price point. Can we talk a little bit about that? I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So, it's not obvious that pricing would be lower, right? Especially when the skill sets are different. When everybody is equally capable of doing it themselves, it may be better to come in at a lower price and give an unfinished product, have them finish it out, right? But at the same time, that is the second thing, secondary layer at which you want to think about this. So if you open up, let's say, a marketplace in which labor skill set, like think about it like an as an iTunes for housing, right? Where the half finished house becomes the Apple um, phone, and you can create a marketplace where people can provide services and material for homeowners to finish out the remaining part of the house. It might actually become a vehicle for monetizing your half finished house as a platform. Also, you can provide those services yourself. Just because you leave the house unfinished doesn't mean you don't help people who move in. You can continue to offer that as a service later as well.
And how does a company know when to provide a DIY product? Assuming there would be a lot of market research in that area.
Yeah, so that is a really good hint to think about this. So it used to be almost impossible like 20 years ago, but these days there are fantastic Internet of Things type of methodologies and simple solutions ready to use available. Happy to talk offline with people who are interested too, which basically allow products to be tracked and followed as consumers use these products in different type of environments, and also as they make modifications to the product. So if a number of your early users are modifying the products that you give them, that's a good hint that maybe you are overdoing it, right? That's the simplest hack I can give you to figure out that maybe it's time to do DIY.
That's interesting. Some of the comments on here, someone referenced Nike doing this with customizable shoes. And it sounds like someone's kid is doing that currently. So that's really interesting, kind of, increasing the value in the mind of the creator. So very cool. Well, thank you again so much for your time today, Karthik. Our next Scheller Lunchtime Live session is Friday, December 3rd at 12 p.m. Eastern. The topic will be 4 things I've learned as a leader at Chick-fil-A, featuring MBA alumna Amy Rich. Amy will discuss 4 things she's learned while working as a team director for Chick-fil-A, implementing a servant leadership attitude, making customers your obsessive priority, switching from doer to leader to meet the demands of tomorrow, and being strategic with time, especially in a growing company filled with strong performers. You can register for this event and learn more about future Scheller Lunchtime Live sessions by following the Georgia Tech Scheller College of Business on LinkedIn. A recording of today's session and future sessions will be available on our LinkedIn and YouTube pages as well. Thank you all for joining us.